Hello everyone. I, Forum Patel from LG School of Law would like to extend my warm welcome to every viewer. Friends, welcome to the sessions of the media and journalism. Let's get started with the understanding. As Mahatma Gandhi ji has stated, the aim of the journalism should be the service. The newspaper press is a great power, but it is like an unchained water which has the power to destroy it all. It can be profitable only when exercised from within. So, self regulation is the basis for media. Friends, when we are starting with the concept of media and journalism, it is very important for all of us to understand that what is the role of the journalism. We all know rather that the impact of the whole media and journalists on our life, day to day life, is huge. It plays the most important part. We believe what they say. They provide us with the factual informations. They provide us with the ongoing situations in our country and of course all over the world, of course. So that would make that whole segment, or rather that whole sector, to be the most sensitive of all. If anything wrong happens, or if they are trying not to follow the self-regulation as been stated by Mahatma Gandhi ji, the whole system would collapse. They would not be able to justify why rather journalism is very important. Journalism is of course a noble calling. It is not about only earning the money when it comes to journalism. The working journalist is to report, write, explain in accordance with the highest standards of the profession. They need to follow certain ethical standards also. They have to rather follow the highest ethical standards when it comes to the profession. So, to regulate this whole segment of the journalism, India has certain rules and of course certain acts with regard to the same. One of them is the Working Journalist Act. Let's have a look at the Working Journalist Act. Press should be both free and responsible, both at the same time. This was held in All India Reporter case. Now, the Working Journalist and Newspaper Employees Act was made applicable when deciding the All India Reporter case, where it was a situation or rather an issue that whether AIR can be considered as a newspaper or not. If it is to be considered, then should the laws which are there for the journalism be applicable for AIR or not? That was the question in this case. It was held in 1983 that AIR cannot be considered as a newspaper. But in 1988, it was stated that it can be considered as a newspaper as the law reporter contains the editorial comment, book review, advertisements, etc., which would change the nature of the whole journal at large. The Working Journalist Act, it lays down minimum standards of the service conditions for the newspaper employees and journalists. So then the whole journalism as a segment would be covered, and it would be deliberately, impliedly, and rather it would be working under the conditions which has been given under Working Journalist Act. Under this act, many of the important provisions has been described regulating the journalism concept. In that, newspaper has been defined, who is a working journalist, or other extension of the definition of working journalist was given. In this act, the applicable of the ID Act has been described, payment of the gratuity, period of the notice of the retrenchment, PF issues, and rather agreements issues has also been covered. When we are talking about coveraging the whole journalism segment, how can we forget the most important act, that is the Press Councils Act. Under this act, the Press Council was reconstituted after 1976 to maintain and improve the standards of the newspaper and news agencies in our country. Although on one hand the Constitution confers the fundamental rights of freedom of press, under the article provided certain restrictions on the publications of the proceeding in the Parliament. In the famous Searchlight case, the Supreme Court held that the publication by a newspaper in certain parts of the free speech of the members in the House which were ordered to be expugned by the speakers constituted to breach the privilege. The question needs to be asked that why do we need the press councils? Amongst the objective visualized for the councils, which were laid down as to safeguard the freedom of the press, to have the standards of the public test and rights and responsibilities of the citizenship, then to encourage the growth of the sense of the responsibility and the public services amongst all these people, along with maintenance of all these things, there has to be the independence in the nature of the press and the newspapers. So it becomes very important to have the whole record where the whole journalism segment can be governed. In 1975, the Press Council abolished by the central government in emergency. It was revived during the Janata government in 1978. The Press Council itself is a body corporate, a juristic personality functioning under the chairmanship of a person with legal background, with 28 members along with that. The first Press Council was constituted under the chairmanship of Justice Mudhorkar in 1966. There are certain objectives and functions of the press councils. They are to maintain the independence and freedom of the press, to build up the code of the conduct, to ensure the maintenance of the high standards of the public taste, to foster the due sense of the rights and responsibility, and also to watch the developments restricting the dissemination of the wrongful news. Under this act, even the powers of the press council has been classified. Complaint against the newspaper or any agency for offending the standards that has been prescribed may be given for any misconduct. It also has the power and the authority to hold the inquiry whenever any question of such comes into the light. The power to censor is that of as the power of the civil court. It also has the power to take issues suo motu in its nature. It also has the power to hear the complaints which has been given by the press against the government or any other individuals also. The Act also specifies that the complaints that has been given has to be in writing and it must be specific. It should be filled within the 2 months prescribed time period along with the original or photocopy of the impugned clippings or a declaration, and also the declaration with regard to the non-pendency of any other matter in any other court. It is very important to note that the journalists, they do have to follow a code of conduct when they are doing their duty. They have to check and verify the previous situations, the factual situations, and they also have to do the background checking while giving the news to the public at large or while doing their duty. That is the exact manner that Mahatma Gandhi ji has stated, that they have to do the self-regulation, which would become the highest integral base for media to be established as the 4th pillar in our country. So friends, these are the 2 acts which are there to regulate and govern the media and journalism when it comes to the media segment. That are the Working Journalist Act and the Press Councils Act. Now, before we get started with the next segment, let's not forget to discuss the Official Secrets Act. This act was to consolidate and amend the laws relating to the official secrets. The offence with regard to the act was spying and wrongful communication of any of the documents for the information or any other plans to any other people other than the authorized signatories. The objective for having the Official Secrets Act in our country was to maintain the security of the state against the leakage of the information or any such alike. This act regulates when it comes to spying, or rather giving the leakage or giving the information, the important information against our country to the enemy states. That means, my friend, it is a code of conduct which governs the journalism part as well. You must be thinking, why am I discussing this act when we are talking about journalism? This act is imposing certain restrictions on the media also. That means it is in conflict with the right to information. Media is there, journalism is there to provide certain information to the public at large. But what happens when the information is secretive in nature? What happens when they leak such information? Should there be any prosecution with regard to the same thing? Do any penalties would be on the person who is doing so? Then the answer to these questions would be answered when we study the Official Secret Act. The punishment under this act ranges from the 3 to 14 years of imprisonment, of course. That means if a person is held liable for any crimes committed under this act, that person will be prosecuted and due penalties as per the law will be there on that person. How do journalists will be helping in these cases? So, journalists will have to help members of the police force above certain rank to investigate whenever any such issue arises, or also they also may ask the journalist for the help when they are not able to get to the point whenever the questions are there if required. So if any information with that secrecy is there with the journalist, it becomes their self-regulatory impugned regulations not to disclose that information to any other person. That will be their responsibility and liability part, my friends. Not all the laws in our country would give you the rights only. Some laws are there to give you the restrictions or to give you to impose the liability part, to impose the duty on an individual. So this Official Secret Act can be considered as one of that kind of the act, my friend. With this, I would like to end the session for the media and journalism. In the next segment, we shall be discussing the other aspect of the media laws. Till then, stay tuned and keep learning. Before we end the session, let's not forget to discuss how the constitution is important when we are talking about the media segment. As we saw in the previous all the sessions, we discussed mostly about the Article 19 of Indian Constitution. And along with that, we discussed the privileges of the parliament that has been laid down by our constitution, along with the powers of the executive and also of the freedom of press. All these segments, all these issues that has been discussed in our constitution in one or the other way. So when we are talking about the media and constitution law, that perspective will be covering a wider sense. That means, my friends, that all the laws that we discussed till now, starting from the criminal law, tort law, including the defamation, sedition, or even obscenity, in the libel and the slander under the law of the torts, including the three different segments, or rather four main segments of our democratic country, that is legislature, executive, judiciary, and the fourth segment, that is the media and journalism, as an important and integral part of our system. Everything is governed by the constitution. So when we are talking about media and constitutional perspective, we must not be having a very singular kind of the idea. You must have gathered the idea through all the sessions that which all are the constitutional perspective when we are talking about the media segment. Most importantly, Article 19 and 21 has been discussed along with the powers and the privileges of the legislature and the executive body, and the powers and the restrictions of the judiciary part, and how the media would be playing role as the fourth pillar. Every segment has to be discussed along with the constitution perspective. That was the reason this perspective was not discussed by me in the previous, or rather the first session. As I promised, we shall be having a look of all the sessions, and then I shall be delivering the gist of the constitution perspective to you all. So friends, this was all about the different perspective, or rather different laws when it comes to the media segment. In the next session, we shall be discussing about media and human rights, of course, along with the ethical issues and the issues with regard to the foreign print media's entry in our country. Till then, stay tuned and keep learning.